this might just be my opinion, but when you love someone, you should do that wholeheartedly, not because it's a transaction. Why do you need a transaction? Why do you need something in return from the person that you're supposed to love? Does that make sense? Like, if you love someone, you love them, you shouldn't expect something in return. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Don't expect their gratitude. Don't expect them to give you something back or their obedience. If you love them, you love them. Love them for them being them, for who they are. Does that make sense? What's going on, guys? Welcome back to The Inner Voice. I'm your host, Cam. On today's episode, I'll be continuing on from our last session where we discussed some of the lessons that I had to unlearn from my childhood. It's also going to be part 3, the final episode of this series, and also the final video on getting to know your host. Now, just to quickly recap, as I mentioned on part 1 of this series, the reasons why I've made this whole section on getting to know your host is in order for you viewers or you listeners to understand the type of background I've come from, so you're going to know what sort of intentions I have when I'm asking our guest certain questions. Furthermore, if you've tuned in, it's only fair for you to get to know me a little bit so you know what sort of experiences I'll personally be bringing to the table. Now, if you look at the first video on this whole section of getting to know your host, you'll see that I started off by getting interviewed by my wife, and the topic was how prison changed me. Now, you might be wondering why that I've done a 3-part series on this particular topic, the lessons that I had to unlearn. Again, like I mentioned in part 1, I personally believe that some of the things that we learn in childhood or unconsciously learn or pick up on, the habits, the behaviors, the type of words that we speak, it has a profound effect on the way we become as teenagers or adults. Now, why did I have to unlearn? Why am I specifically talking about the lessons that I had to unlearn? Well, it demonstrates the sort of background I come from and my personal values and principles which I've learned to develop on my own as I've grown up. Therefore, if you understand my values, my principles, and the way I think and believe, you're going to understand why I ask our guest certain questions and the reasons why I approach certain topics in the way I will be. Now, I don't want to waste too much time on the intro, so let's just quickly recap from the previous 2 episodes, part 1 and part 2. The points that we mentioned in the previous episodes, as I mentioned, were things that affected me in childhood up until my adolescence. And I started off from the things that affected me the least, going in ascending order to the things that affected me the most. So the points that we have covered so far is gossiping, constantly blaming others, segregation and how that affected me and my household, feelings don't matter, hypervigilance and always being on edge, the fear of explosive conflict, people pleasing and family structure. I've just simply bullet pointed each of them. Now, if you want to know how that affected me or the examples that I've shared, please refer back to the previous episodes in order for you to understand. But on today's episode, I'll be finalizing this series of episodes with this part 3 and finishing off with the final couple of points which affected me the most in my childhood. So number 1 on the list today, which is point number 9, if we adding them up collectively, it's number 9 and number 1 for today. One of the things that affected me the most in my childhood, which I really didn't understand and I couldn't comprehend, and no one really educated me or taught me any different, was this toxic love. I never knew what toxic love was. I never knew what healthy love was. I was a child. You have to bear this in mind. Now, how do I mean there was toxic love in our household and why did it affect me? Well, I quickly learned in my childhood and my young teenage life that to receive the love of certain family members or even parents, you had to abide by their rules. If you didn't abide by their rules or you didn't meet their expectations, then they'd be quick to withdraw their love, if that makes sense. Like, love was always conditional. Does that make sense? Now, don't get me wrong, like, this might just be my opinion, but when you love someone, you should do that wholeheartedly, not because it's a transaction. Why do you need a transaction? Why do you need something in return from the person that you're supposed to love? Does that make sense? Like, if you love someone, you love them, you shouldn't expect something in return. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Don't expect their gratitude. Don't expect them to give you something back or their obedience. If you love them, you love them. Love them for them being them, for who they are. Does that make sense? Like I said, like, it was very conditional. Like, if you didn't do what they expected you to do, they'll withdraw their love and they'll completely back off. And there's so many examples where I could give, like, where I did something wrong in my childhood or when I was young, and they'd team up like together and they'd get my dad to change the locks on the house so I couldn't go back in the house and I'd be on the streets. Does that make sense? I know it sounds like an extreme example, and I didn't do anything to that extent where they should be changing the locks on me and kicking me out. Like, I got seen with a girlfriend, and that sort of extreme where everyone would turn their back on me, like, and it's so common. Like, when I think about it now, to this day, like, the love is still conditional. It's very toxic, and to the point where they don't really want to do things wholeheartedly. They'll only do things if it best suits them or you're willing to meet their expectations. And I just think that's completely abnormal and unhealthy. And as I've just briefly touched on the changing the locks example, like I've said, like, I've come from a big household. So let's say I've upset my brother or I've upset my dad. There should be another member of the family, like, that kind of brings us together or, speaks to us and just kind of balances it out. Someone in the middle, like a middleman. But there never was. And this is going to go on to my final point, which I'll breeze past this one now because I'm already going into another point. With fallout, like, like, when it's good, it's good. And when it's bad, it's bad. Like, one of them, like, if it's good, it's small talk, you're having a laugh, everyone's excited. But then as soon as you leave each other, there's no communicating for a long time. You might, like, one of my brothers I've not spoken to for like 2-3 years he sees me in the same house, he just doesn't want to chat to me. And if it's bad, everyone just kind of cuts ties. No one ever rekindles a relationship. No one ever speaks. So point 1 for today is toxic love. The second point on my list today, which is number 10, I believe, is our family had a hard time with jealousy. Now, hear me out. If you was to ask members of my family, they would either deny it or they won't acknowledge that they do it. For example, like, because we were so deprived of emotional affection from our parents or from our elder siblings going down the line. Now, if we see affection between one sibling and another, or a parent and a child, some of us can't help but feel this insecurity inside. We don't feel stable. And I'll be the first to admit it. Like, if I see one of my siblings getting love from my parent, like a love that I didn't get, for example, my initial response is to feel a little bit jealous. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't envy them. I recheck myself, but it's the initial feeling. Do you understand? And a lot of my family members, they're not going to think like that. They're not going to recheck themselves. They're not going to have that level of acknowledgement in themselves to correct their intentions. And the reason why I can confidently say that is because their actions after. Their actions. So, for example, if my dad has shown me love or shown my younger brother love in a certain way, my sisters might start behaving in a spiteful way where they'll start gossiping about him, or they'll start gossiping about him and dad. So their actions show you how they're feeling inside. Does that make sense? Now, going back to what I was saying is the initial feeling of jealousy, it shouldn't even be there. Does that make sense? Like if I was secure in my relationship with my mom or my dad or my older brother or my older sisters, I shouldn't feel jealous if they're showing another member of their family, another member of like our family love. That's it's weird. It don't make sense. Like when I look at my wife, like if she sees her mom or dad giving her brothers or her younger sister affection, she doesn't get jealous because she's secure in her relationship with her parents. You get me? Does that make sense? So this is what I'm saying. Like the home that I've come from, because we were so deprived of love, we have a hard time feeling happy for one another when they're getting affection or love from another member of family, even to the point where if two sisters have planned to go on an adventure or, you know, on a day out with the kids, some of the others, like, they feel left out. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not a big deal. Like I said to you a minute ago, initially I might feel that feeling, but I recheck myself. But some of my sisters, they feel insecure, man. They start getting spiteful towards them, start saying negative things, and you know, like, oh, let's see if they complain about the kids, let's see how they manage, and it's always these spiteful comments because inside they're feeling a little bit jealous. Now, moving on to the next point. This is probably one of the biggest things that affected me throughout my entire childhood. And like I said in part 1, and I think part 2 as well, I briefly touched upon, a lot of the points will kind of overlap each other, or they'll touch upon each other in some sort of way. And this point, it touches on probably all of them. In fact, this is probably the root cause of most of the points that we've already covered. And that is bad communication. Now, bad communication could go all the way back to the gossiping, to the slandering, to the constant blame, all these other aspects that we've already covered. But bad communication in the sense that we didn't really speak to each other growing up. It was always small talk or criticizing. There was never appreciation towards one another. Like, we didn't really used to say thank you. It was foreign. You know, we didn't used to say sorry if we did something wrong. There was no hello and bye. Like, yeah, there might be a hello when you've just walked into the house, you know, like a sister's come to visit or whatever. But no one really said bye. You know, you have a phone call. We feel awkward to say bye on the phone. Like, it's so weird. I know it sounds really pathetic, but it makes a big difference. And the communication was that bad. Like, if you dissect it in more detail, you know, like, we should be able to communicate with one another. Like, in a family, you should be able to openly discuss your concerns, the things that you're worried about, the things that you're struggling with, you know, your highs, your lows. You want to be able to share that with your family, right? We didn't. We found more comfort in speaking to people outside of our home. And my parents do that, shall I say. And my siblings, in fact, we're all the same. Like, we'll be more comfortable to speak to a stranger or a colleague or a friend rather than our own family members. You know, the communication's so bad that on the same street that we grew up, we've got one blood auntie. Like, my dad's sister lives on the street, my dad's brother lives on the street, and we're not even close to our cousins or our uncle or auntie. Barely ever seen them, barely spoke to them. To this day, it's the same. The communication is so bad in our home. Just the littlest things you can't even talk about. You can't say, like, oh, do you mind just moving your car for me? Like, you're treading on eggshells as you're saying it to the individual, because you're going back to the fear of explosive conflict. You fear that they're going to explode. Our communication was so terrible in our home, and this was one of the biggest lessons that I intentionally unlearned as I was growing up. You know, like in my adolescence, in my young adult life, and now as an adult, it's something that I'm consistently trying to improve. I want to be able to communicate and articulate my words in the right way, because I've got 2 little girls at home that are growing up watching me. Doesn't matter what I say to them or what I try to teach them. It's what they're watching me do. So if I don't learn how to communicate properly with my wife, with my kids, and I don't do it in a healthy manner, what do I expect my kids to do? Follow in my family's footsteps? Or do I want to change that by breaking that pattern and becoming better, becoming more evolved, like becoming a better version of myself and evolving to the point where my kids look at me and they learn from better habits? Do you understand? So just to wrap up this point, communication is a fundamental part of life. Whether it's in your relationship with your spouse, with your children, with your parents, colleague at work, or your supervisors, even to the point where you try to get a pay rise, you need to be able to articulate yourself in the right way by communicating. And communication isn't just all verbal. Most of it is body language. And then a big part of it is your tone and the way you sound in your volume, in your pitch, and the rest of it. The small percentage is what actually comes out of your mouth. But even that part, if you can't articulate that nicely or effectively, then you're not going to get far in life. You're always going to hit a dead end, or you're going to have many problems. So that is one thing that I really wanted to change from my childhood, and a big lesson that I had to unlearn. And to this current day, I'm learning how to perfect it. Now, the final point I want to cover on this episode, and the final point, which I believe was the biggest and harshest reality checks for me as I grew up, and the biggest lesson I had to unlearn, is reconciliation. For those of you who are new to the word, reconciliation is basically the process of healing when there's been some form of conflict. Two individuals have fallen out, or there's been a disagreement. Reconciliation is basically the patching up process. I've grown up my whole life never seen that process unfold before my eyes. I've never seen my parents reconcile their issues or their differences or their fights. I've never seen a single one of my parents reconcile any issues between siblings or between their children. Even us siblings, as we've grown up, like from when I was a kid, and I used to watch my older siblings, to me becoming an adult, anytime we've had any issues, we've never reconciled our differences. There's never been another person to, even to the point, like I mentioned earlier, I've got a brother that's not spoken to me for years, and there's not much I can do about it because he doesn't want to chat to me. And it's not nice. Like my principle is, our religion teaches us not to hold on to any, any sort of disagreement, or basically you're not supposed to fall out with another fellow Muslim for over 3 days. You can be upset with someone for a couple of days, but then you're supposed to reconcile your relationship and put all differences aside. Now, in my family, no one has ever brought 2 individuals back together. There's a term that we use in Bengali, and they call it a bisar, which basically is a formal sit down when someone's not happy with someone, and they have these meetings and talks to establish some common ground. Now, my dad's been able to do that with many families throughout our community growing up, but he wasn't able to do it in our own home. And I can't just hold that against my pops, because to be fair, it was mainly him and my mum's relationship collectively. They had too many differences. They never found a common ground. And those kids, we ended up following that pattern. And when I think about it, I'm like I said, I'm 7th in line, and my oldest sibling, he should have stepped up. He didn't. It is what it is. But to this day, there's no argument. You can always change. As long as you're breathing, doesn't mean you have to continue doing the same crap you was doing yesterday or last year or 10 years ago. You can always make a difference, just like I'm doing today. I'm not doing the same stuff I was doing 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I'm changing certain patterns, certain beliefs, certain principles, if you want to call it. Now, in our home, if somebody falls out, that's it. They're falling out. They won't speak for weeks or months or even years sometimes. And nothing will ever get said. They'll be gossiping behind each other's backs, and other members of families participating, depending on which side, which person they're sat with. So they'll be two-faced as well. But no one will ever have no one ever takes that initiative or that leadership to just bring them together, because everyone fears explosive conflict. Everyone is fearful of how the other person's going to respond, and no one wants to listen to one another. Everyone has their own view and they're just stubborn with it. So how did we ever rekindle relationships? So in our family, what happens is if two individuals are falling out or one person's not happy with the other person, the only time they'll speak to that individual is at an event, or if it's Eid and everyone's come around to mum and dad's house, or like they need something from that individual, they'll just go back to acting normal like nothing happened. Do you know how unhealthy that was growing, like watching that and being part of that growing up? You have so many unanswered questions. You have this inner turmoil and you have this resentment inside. Like, I see to this day many of my family members where they've had a fallout with someone, and years down the line or whatever, they've not, everything's forgotten about, but years down the line, they'll bring it up in another argument when it's something of a completely different topic. It's so weird to think about, like now, like if I've fallen out with my brother over something like, let's say, something to do with a disagreement at home about what we're going to eat, he'll start having digs about things I did 10 years ago to upset him. This is my point. When you have issues that are unresolved, at some point they can resurface if you don't speak them out. If you don't fix your problems when it's in the moment, or when you've both calmed down a little bit, or there's a middleman, you're going to have this resentment building up inside. Does that make sense? I don't want to obviously get into too much detail about it, but like I said, reconciliation was probably the biggest thing that affected me throughout my childhood. And I know it sounds like a fancy word, but I'm telling you, personally, that is what affected me the most. It might be different for other members of my family, but for me personally, this was one of the greatest lessons that I had to unlearn. And it really affected me, like seeing two of my family members fall out and then not speak for a long time. And especially being one of the younger siblings, there wasn't much I could do. Like, especially as a kid, like you're just watching things unfold and two individuals not speaking and them two families not coming together, or it's Eid time, and because this family's come round to like mum and dad's house, that other family's not going to come until that family goes. And it was really sad watching that as I was growing up. I didn't used to like the lack of unity. And like on a previous point on one of the previous episodes, I mentioned about segregation, and reconciliation was one of the reasons why it would be segregated, because no one ever wanted to resolve their issues or their differences or speak them out. So I hope it's not been too long-winded, this video. And I know the points that I've mentioned today, I've not given many examples like some of the other points I've done on the other two episodes. That's because these ones are a little bit more sensitive and I wouldn't know which examples to give. And some of the examples, I'll be honest, I don't really want to give, because it's just a little bit embarrassing for my family as much as it is for myself. Now, just to wrap it up, this was the final video I'm intentionally doing on getting to know your host. Now, if you want to understand the type of background I come from, I know there's so many different aspects we can cover, like what my experience was like in prison, or the abuse that I went through in childhood by a neighbour across the road. There's specific things that we could discuss in thorough detail, and they're episodes in themselves. Or even my journey towards God. Like how did I go from not being a practicing Muslim, being raised in a fairly practicing home when my parents are practicing and most of my siblings prayed. Why was I such an outlaw, if you want to call it? And my journey towards God, how did that happen? There's many things that we can speak about. And I think what would be more interesting is for that type of experience or things to naturally come out. You know, depending on what guests I bring in and the type of questions and conversations that we get into, there's going to be things that you're going to learn more about me as we go along. But for now, this is going to be the final episode of Getting to Know Your Host. As of next episode, we're going to officially bring in our first guest. And I'm telling you, it's going to be an interesting one. So tune in and make sure you keep up to date with all our latest episodes. Who knows? You don't know what you might miss out on. Guys, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, hit that thumbs up, leave a positive comment in the description down below, and share this video with someone who you think might find it beneficial. All that good stuff. And if you haven't, please hit that bell button so you get the latest updates on the next episodes. But for now, I just want to give a massive thank you to our existing subscribers, the viewers that are watching who haven't subscribed to the channel already. I really appreciate your time and your support and for being part of this journey. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your support. Thank you for being part of this journey. I hope our future episodes will entertain or inspire you. God bless.